Hello, everybody. We have now reached my adult book recommendation video. I've done a children's book one, a middle grade one, a young adult one, and now we are into my final genre category of books I want to recommend to you all. I will do this in two videos as well, just like my YA videos were, because I primarily read YA and adult books. And I was thinking about how I was going to split up my adult recommendations, but when I quickly looked at my top adult recommendations for you, I realized half of them were romance. So I decided, well, I should do one video on adult romance books that I want to recommend, and another video that is on everything else in the adult genre, although they're primarily fiction and fantasy books. That's my area of interest. So today we're going to do the first one, which is my romance book recommendation video. The first book we're going to talk about is a book by Emily Henry, and it's called People We Meet on Vacation, which is actually my favorite Emily Henry book. So in People We Meet on Vacation, it is about two best friends who first met in college and every summer would go on one big trip together, but it's actually been 2 years since they've done so. It's because they had some sort of falling out 2 years ago. And so the main character, she decides that they should go on one last summer trip together to try to fix their relationship. So I found this story very satisfying. I like the second chanceness of it. Two characters coming together after they've taken some time to learn about themselves and grow. And now they're able to commit to one another and be honest with themselves. I really like that once they get their act together and figure their stuff out, once they admit their love for one another, the love is very clear. I like how these two characters show their love by making room for one another. And it's not the two characters are sacrificing so much of their individual lives to make the relationship work. It's very clear that they each are very unique, very different from one another, that they each have their own goals in their lives. And in this book, they realize that they can actually make the relationship work while still pursuing their own goals. It's not them giving up their future and their goals in order to make the relationship work, which I was very appreciative of and found very satisfying. And in fact, my favorite quote in this book actually shows one of the characters realizing that fact and making it clear that it's not their job to fix the other person's problems or be everything for them. They're each their own person. They each love each other and care for one another. They want to support each other, but it's not their job to be everything for the other person. So my favorite quote is, "It's not your job to make me happy, okay? You can't make anyone happy. I'm happy just because you exist, and that's as much of my happiness you have control over." So drawing a boundary in the sand, saying, I want this relationship, but we can only have this relationship if we can understand this. It's my job to make myself happy and achieve my own goals, and I hope you're there to support me in that, just like it's not my job to make you happy or achieve your goals for you. You do that, and I support you on that path. So if you like a book about grief, second chances, taking risks, and finding home for you, this is the book for you. The next book is After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this book is about a couple who have been married for a few years and have chosen to spend a year apart in order to try to fix their relationship because they're having a lot of problems. And in that year apart, the one rule is they cannot contact each other. They have to dedicate their year for themselves only to try to figure out what they need and to try to find their love again. And hopefully after a year, they can come back together and commit to their relationship once more. This story interested me just because of the premise. I liked how it's not a typical romance where you see two characters meeting and falling in love. These two characters have already met, have already fallen in love, and now we get to see one of the hard parts of a marriage, one of the low points of a marriage, and see how that plays out. How do they maneuver this and hopefully come back together? I particularly liked the plot device that the author used to allow us readers to still see our narrator is the wife, and we only really see what she's doing in her year off. Because the rule is no contact, that means we wouldn't get the husband's perspective at all. We wouldn't see any of his growth during that year. But there is a plot device, I'm not going to spoil it, that this author does use that does allow us to see a little bit of what's going on in the husband's year off while still maintaining that no contact rule. And it was very satisfying for me. I really enjoyed it, the way the author did that. My favorite quote is actually one major realization that one of the spouses, one of the characters made during their year off. So that quote is, "Maybe it doesn't matter if you need someone during the everyday moments of your life. Maybe what matters is that when you need someone, they are the one you need. Maybe needing someone isn't about not being able to do it without them. Maybe needing someone is about it being easier if they are by your side." So this quote is showing one of the characters really questioning what they thought they understood a marriage and relationship to be and coming to their own conclusions on what marriage means to them and what a relationship means to them, which allows them to get one step closer to hopefully rekindling their love for their spouse. So if you like a book about the depth of family ties in your life, rediscovering love, and the meaning of marriage, this is the book for you. The next book is Just Last Night by McFarlane, about a woman named Eve and her group of friends who are spending time grieving a loss that they've all experienced. And during that time together, Eve begins to learn that maybe her friends are not who she thought they were. She rethinks her own life and her choice of who she surrounds herself with. So I like McFarlane's books in that it's always a romance and something else. There's another very almost equally powerful subplot that is just as important as the romance itself, because usually the subplot has to do with the character's growth, and the only way the romance works is because our main character has grown in some way. And this book was also interesting because it wasn't just exploring what a quality romantic relationship looks like, it also explored what quality friendships should look like. The quote that I like actually kind of touches on that. So the quote is, "I notice once again that company that's not the right fit for you is so much more lonelier than being happy alone." So she comes to the realization that being alone doesn't necessarily mean loneliness, just like being surrounded by people doesn't necessarily mean not feeling lonely, that it's important to have quality people in your life, and that's what combats loneliness, not necessarily just people themselves. So like a book about grief, betrayal, and the meaning of friendship, this is the book for you. The next book is by my favorite author. So it is called A Stitch in Time, and it's by Kelley Armstrong. In this book, it's about a modern age woman named Bronwyn who lives in Canada but has to go to England because she just inherited a family manor that she grew up spending some summers there. And while she's there, she comes across a time stitch that makes her travel back in time to the 1800s. And she re-meets William Thorne because she knew him as a child when they were both children when she would spend her summers at the manor. But she hasn't been back in many, many, many years because of a family tragedy. So I like how this book showed two characters who started off young, loving each other, and how that love remained after so many years apart. I like how they both support each other through their past traumas and their anxieties. And I also like how the time stitch itself acts as a barrier to them moving on in their lives and a barrier to their romance, because there's always the threat of, we don't fully understand how the time stitch works. So if I were ever to travel back to my time, will I ever be able to come back to you? So just that alone increased the stakes, and I like high stakes. And I also like how this book has a very strong mystery subplot, and the main character, Bronwyn, is able to see ghosts. So she is forced to try to solve the mystery behind this troubled ghost that's hanging around the manor. And she's the only one that can see the ghosts, and I'm a sucker for a character that has unique abilities that no one else has. So I found the exploration of the mystery also satisfying, as well as the romance. So if you like a book about love across time, dealing with the ghosts of your past and literal ghosts, this is the book for you. And the last book I want to recommend in my adult romance book recommendation video is Luck and Last Resorts by Sarah Gruner Ruiz. This book is about a yacht stewardess named Nina and a yacht chef named Ollie, and how they have this one last summer to try to figure out if they can fully commit to a relationship with one another. And if they can't, Ollie has to move on. So he's going to go back to Ireland and make steps to move on with his life without her, even though he'd prefer to be with her. But the problem is that Nina has gotten through her life, survived her life by living by two rules. First rule is to always have fun. The second rule is not to rely on anybody. And that rule especially is not conducive to a committed long-term relationship. So I like this book because it's not a typical romance book where you're reading a story about why two characters are getting together. This is instead a book about why aren't these two characters getting together. So I found that interesting in itself. I also really related to some of Nina's tendencies, especially the hyper-independence, believing that you shouldn't rely on anybody because they'll see you as less worthy or lovable, or you'll be an inconvenience to them. So if you like a book about the importance of trust, taking risks, and being vulnerable in relationships, this is the book for you. So there's a few things I realized about my romance tastes when compiling this list for you. One, I realized that I really like reading about romantic interests that show so much respect for one another. That is such a turn on when characters take the time to really think about how amazing and worthy and lovable their romantic partner is at regular intervals in a plot, showing that these characters really think of one another and not in ways of, I want my romantic interest to do this for me. They're basically just being spectators and supporters because they make it so obvious that their romantic partner is such a worthy, lovable human being as they are, and they're just thankful to just be in their life and to be able to travel through life with them. I also realized that I like romances, but they almost have an equally as prominent subplot that has a lot to do with characters' personal growth, because I think the romances just work so well, and the only reason they work in these books is because the characters have done the work to grow themselves. That these characters are not sacrificing anything important in their life in order to make a relationship work. In fact, the only reason the relationship works is because those relationships in these books are showing that they can be great supporters to one another as they both achieve what they individually want from their lives. So if you have read any of these books, or if any of these books interest you enough that you want to read them and add them to your TBR, please let me know below. I'm always curious where other people's tastes lie. I especially like to hear if anybody's read the lesser known authors like Sarah Gruner Ruiz and Kelley Armstrong. I don't see them very much on BookTube or Book Talk. And with that, I will see you in my next video, which is going to be more adult book recommendations, except not romances, because we already did those today.